Paleontology is one of the most ever-changing fields in science, and how we view the ancient past has changed dramatically since the field first started out. This is due in part to discoveries that reshape our understanding of the past, and there have been many discoveries made throughout the years. While all discoveries are important, there have been some fossil discoveries that are truly significant, whether it be for a better understanding of an animal or for a whole group of organisms. Here are the most important discoveries in paleontology. Mosasaurs and ichthyosaurs are among the first marine animals that people think of when they think of Mesozoic oceans, and their history of discovery came relatively early into the history of paleontology. These two ocean-going reptile groups both gave us as humans the first glimpses into times long past, even though a majority of people around the time of their discovery didn't believe in the concept of evolution. Mosasaurus, the first of its family to be named, was first discovered and identified by a fragmentary skull from a chalk quarry near Mount St. Peter, a hill near Maastricht in the Netherlands, in 1764, which was later collected by Lieutenant Jean-Baptiste Drouin in 1766. The specimen was procured for the Teylers Museum at Haarlem in 1784 by Martinus Marum, the first director of the museum, who published a description of the specimen in 1790, considering it to be a species of big breathing fish, or in other words a whale, since at the time of the specimen's discovery, whales were still considered to be in the same group as fish, as not much was known about their biology at the time. Others in the region, such as retired German-Dutch army physician Johann Hoffmann, presumed the remains to belong to that of a crocodile, whilst a professor by the name of Petrus Camper disagreed with this thinking and concluded that the remains belonged to that of an unknown toothed whale, akin to that of an orca, for example. In 1798, the identity of Mosasaurus was determined to be that of a giant monitor by Adrian Camper, a fact confirmed by George Cuvier, who used the specimen as further evidence to support his claims that animal species could in fact go extinct. The idea that this fossil was a giant version of a modern animal seems strange, even to Cuvier, but his analysation of the specimen further gave us insight into the distant past, when we were first learning of these unique and long extinct organisms. Mosasaurus was indeed a member of the order Squamata, and it has been determined that their closest living relatives are indeed monitor lizards as well as snakes. These reptiles came to be aquatic and dominated the seas after the disappearance of ichthyosaurs from the fossil record, becoming some of the most imposing and awe-inspiring predators to ever grace the Earth's oceans, and from their point of discovery through to the present day, continue to intrigue us in new and exciting ways. Ichthyosaurs, another group of aquatic reptiles, had been discovered throughout the 18th century, but were not formally described until the 1800s. In 1811, in Lyme Regis along what is now called the Jurassic coast of Dorset, the first complete skull of one of these animals, since identified as a specimen of Temnodontosaurus plateodon, was found by Joseph Anning, the brother of the now world-renowned Mary Anning, who in the following year, being only 12 at the time, managed to secure the torso that belonged to the same specimen. Their mother, Molly Anning, sold the combined piece to a squire by the name of Henry Henley for £23, who then lent the fossils to the London Museum of Natural History, nowadays the Natural History Museum. In 1814, the Anning specimen was described in a scientific publication by Professor Everard Home, with him feeling uncertain in how the animal should be classified. Though most skeletal elements looked very reptilian in nature to Home, the anatomy as a whole resembled that of a fish, and so he considered what we now know as ichthyosaurs to be a transitional form in between that of fish and crocodiles, not in an evolutionary sense however, instead regarding their existence in the chain of being, a hierarchical assortment of organisms, with the chain starting at God and then progressing downwards, from highest to lowest in terms of importance and notoriety. Home gave a formal generic name known as Proteosaurus in 1819, but unbeknownst to Home, a German naturalist by the name of Karl Koenig had already referred to the animal as Ichthyosaurus, meaning fish saurian, in 1817. The latter name at the time, however, was considered an invalid nomen nudum, or an adequate name, as Koenig only published the name in 1825, but the name of Ichthyosaurus was adopted by de Lebesgue in 1819 in a lecture where he named 3 species of the genus. Although by present standards the latter name of Ichthyosaurus should have been discarded, the Proteosaurus term had gradually fallen out of use, eventually becoming a nomen oblitum, or a forgotten name. The discovery of these previously unknown extinct animals generated much publicity, capturing the imagination of both the public and scientists alike. Of all the features Ichthyosaurs possessed, it was the particularly large, sclerostic rings that stood out the most, and understandably so. Their bizarre look, influenced by art of the time that erroneously depicted the rings to be visible on the living animals, induced a feeling of alienation and uneasiness, and this helped to allow people to gain an understanding of the immense span of time that had passed since Ichthyosaurs had swum our oceans. Their depiction in Crystal Palace Park further increased their popularity, and a watercolour piece illustrated by Henry de Lebesgue, titled Duria Antiquior, cemented their place in paleontology. This work is highly notable, and for good reason. Duria Antiquior has been regarded as the first attempt to accurately reconstruct a prehistoric ecosystem, what we now know today as paleoart, and is thus worth a great deal to the history of paleontology and our continually evolving view on the ancient world. No longer were these fossilised bones just simply bones. They had a new lease on life, and the animals that once surrounded the bones were now alive once again in a metaphorical sense due to these artistic depictions. And paleoart has gone on to be exceptionally key to visualising the ancient past and viewing animals and ecosystems that are now long gone. Understanding the strata and the Earth's processes is crucial for finding and understanding fossils, to what time period they are from, and to what environment they died in, and so on. Maps produced and painstakingly made by William Smith, an English geologist in 1815, helped us to understand with greater accuracy than ever before what lay beneath our feet, and his maps are credited to be the first to depict the geology of an area on a nationwide level. Just 2 short centuries ago, the chronology of the planet's history was largely invisible despite the evidence of rock layers at cliffs and canyons, with people believing that mountains grew organically like plants, which seems odd to say nowadays due to our understanding of geological processes, but back then there was nothing to indicate such phenomenon, and people's views went largely unchallenged until Smith's maps. During his 20s, Smith worked for a coal canal company in Somerset, and during his time working there, he inspected a number of coal mines in the area, where he first observed and recorded the various layers of rock and coal exposed by the mining. The rock layers were arranged in a predictable pattern, with the various strata always being found in the same relative positions. Additionally, each particular stratum could be identified by the fossils it contained, and a succession of fossil groups from older to younger rocks could also be found in many parts of England, further confirming his finds. His studies in the coal mines, combined with his subsequent observations of the strata exposed by canal excavations, proved crucial to the foundation of his theories on stratigraphy, which would later go on to be key in creating the first geological map of England. In 1799, Smith produced the first large-scale geological maps of the area around Bath, Somerset. Initially, Smith only knew how to draw the vertical extent of the rocks, but not how to display them horizontally. However, in the Somerset County Agricultural Society, he found a map showing the types of soils and vegetation around Bath and their geographical extent. Importantly, the differing rock types were coloured in unique colours to distinguish from one another, and using this technique, Smith could draw a geological map from his observations with greater accuracy and understanding of the distinct rock layers. Smith published his geological map in 1815, and whilst not being the first geological map, a map by William Macleod was published 6 years earlier, Smith's was the first to cover such a large area in detail, with the whole of England and Wales being covered, as well as parts of Scotland. The production and making of the maps proved to be quite painstaking, with Smith travelling by foot and horseback throughout Great Britain to make observations for his map, which he would then hand draw and colour in, eventually producing 400 original copies, the printing of which took 2 years. Unfortunately for Smith, his commitment to his ambitious work meant he had to sell his geological collection and other assets to fund his research, and he eventually landed in debtor's prison due to his inability to pay off his expenses. Smith was also shunned due to his limited academic background, having only gotten through elementary school and having humble origins as a son of a village blacksmith, and his ideas were often stolen and plagiarised, with his own work being mostly ignored. Smith managed to get out of debtor's prison, however, after 8 weeks, and continued his work even through all of his financial turmoil. After his release, he returned to his home on 15 Buckingham Street, only to find a bailiff at his door, with his home and property seized. Smith's work was recognised, however, by one of his employers as he worked as an itinerant surveyor, known as Sir John Johnstone, who, noticing his talent, took steps to gain the respect he rightfully deserved, appointing Smith as land steward to his estate based in Scarborough. It was not until the February of 1831 that the work Smith had put in was recognised, with him receiving the Wollaston Medal by the Geological Society of London in recognition of his achievements, him being the first person to receive the prestigious award. It was on this occasion that the president of the society, Adam Sedgwick, referred to Smith as the father of English geology. Smith's discovery on how fossils could determine what layer of rock they belong to is key to our understanding of how fossils form and what can be found, with the map types and geological ideas Smith theorised about still being incorporated and used within modern geology. His discovery of the different rock layers and how and what you can find in them is important for any paleontologist, both young and old, and what you can learn from William Smith is that even through hardships and setbacks, you can be recognised for your work, even if it takes a long time. Dinosaurs have been known for a long time, and it's hard to imagine a time when they weren't an acknowledged part of our history. They've become such a familiar part of our lives that thinking there was a point in time where we didn't know of these animals seems strange, but that was in fact the case before the 1820s, where the discovery of the first recognised dinosaurs introduced us to a world predating our own, and the first 3 described dinosaurs was the start of this understanding. Megalosaurus, the first described dinosaur, as you will know from my When Dinosaurs Were Scrotums video, has quite the interesting early history, and I would recommend checking that video out to gain some insight into the early description of the first named dinosaur. Aside from its early history, the story of Megalosaurus began when in 1815 a geologist and chemist by the name of John Kidd reported the find of bones that appeared to belong to a giant tetrapod at a Stonesfield quarry in Oxfordshire. The bones, that consisted of hip, hind limb and vertebral bones, as well as a lower jaw fragment that was packed with large, serrated teeth, was acquired by paleontologist William Buckland, a man of intriguing nature who honestly deserves his own video in and of itself. Buckland, upon acquiring the teeth, initially knew not what to make of them, as they were of a unique appearance, and unlike anything he had ever seen before. That was until Georges Cuvier, a French anatomist, visited Buckland in Oxford to view the remains, and realised that the bones were those of a giant lizard-like creature. Buckland further studied the fossils alongside his friend William Conybeare, a fellow geologist, with both Buckland and Conybeare in 1822 providing a scientific name for the fossils in a joint article, that being Megalosaurus, the big lizard. The name was formally announced by Buckland in 1824 in a Geological Society of London meeting, of which he was its president. The first reconstruction of the animal was given by Buckland himself, who considered Megalosaurus to be a quadrupedal amphibious creature, capable of both swimming out at sea and walking on land. Buckland estimated the size of Megalosaurus to be around 40 feet in length and the weight of an elephant in a lecture, although in the printed version of said lecture, he estimated a length of 60 to 70 feet to also be plausible, based off of living reptiles. Megalosaurus, alongside Iguanodon and Hylaeosaurus, which I'll get into later, were classified by Richard Owen, a zoologist and paleontologist, as higher level reptiles, and that they would have had a high metabolism and a more upright posture than what Buckland believed, meaning that earlier size estimates were highly exaggerated. Under the scientific direction of Owen, natural history sculptor and artist Benjamin Hawkins created life-size models of Megalosaurus and other prehistoric animals, with then at the time modern and rigorous scientific consultation, culminating in an imposing statue that still stands today, ever since its unveiling in 1852. This model, as well as the others created, were the first dinosaur sculptures to be created, and they most definitely influenced the public's perception of dinosaurs. For the first time, the public could visualise these animals in a three-dimensional way, promoting awareness for the extinct animals, ensuring that the models and the animals they depicted would be integral to our fascination with these reptiles. The presumption that carnivorous dinosaurs like Megalosaurus were quadrupeds went unchallenged until the find of the small Compsognathus in 1859 that showed it to be a clear biped. Bipedalism in Megalosaurus still went largely refuted until 1870, when the discovery of the type specimen of Eustripdospondus from Oxford, an animal with a more comparable size to Megalosaurus, was found with more complete remains that showed a more bipedally suited build than what was thought of in theropod dinosaurs. New discoveries from America, such as Allosaurus, further confirmed to scientists that Megalosaurus must have also been bipedal like its relatives, and although its tail was dragging on the ground in these new reconstructions, it was a big step up from the previous ones. Even decades after its discovery, Megalosaurus was still present in the minds of both the public and scientists alike, the latter of which saw Megalosaurus as the typical large carnivorous dinosaur, a true testament to its notoriety. As a result, Megalosaurus began to function as a wastebasket taxon, meaning that many carnivorous dinosaurs that were discovered in and around Europe were being assigned to the genus. This approach to classification slowly changed during the 20th century, and many species of Megalosaurus were reassigned to their own genus. Carcharodontosaurus, Dilophosaurus, Proceratosaurus, and Majungasaurus are all examples of this reassignment. Nowadays, the only species of Megalosaurus that remains valid is Megalosaurus bucklandi, ironically being the first named species. Throughout all of this, Megalosaurus has remained a relatively well-known dinosaur through its initial description, and although nowadays it is overshadowed and usually less regarded when compared to the feathered dromaeosaurs and majestic sauropods, the history of the animal and its importance to paleontology is nonetheless an important one. Megalosaurus also shows the progression of paleoart and the understanding of an animal, with a rich 200 years of artistic depictions showing the change from massive lizard to agile predator, showcasing a perfect example of how science and our understanding of the earth and its animals can change over time and that nothing stays consistent. Who knows what the future holds for the big lizard? We'll just have to wait and see. In 1822, several large teeth were found in the strata of Tilgate Forest in Sussex, England, either by Gideon Mantell or his wife Mary. The exact discoverer of the teeth is unknown due to several contradictory sources, whether you go by the story of Mary discovering the teeth while her husband, being a surgeon, was visiting a patient, or that Gideon himself had discovered the teeth in his own time, but that's not necessarily too important to the later research done by Gideon. After some research, Mantell attributed the teeth to belong to some form of herbivorous reptile, and showed the teeth to other scientists of the time, including the notable anatomist George Cuvier. His findings were however dismissed, with the other scientists believing that his so-called reptile teeth were nothing more than fish scales or mammalian teeth, and that they had come from less strata than what Mantell believed, with George Cuvier identifying the teeth as belonging to that of a rhinoceros. Mantell was still convinced in his belief that the teeth were of a unique nature, and continued to send teeth to Cuvier for further analysis. Cuvier eventually admitted his mistakes, and acknowledged the similarities Mantell's teeth had to living reptiles, and that they must have belonged to some massive herbivorous animal. After further research, Mantell noticed the similarities the teeth had to modern-day iguanas, the only difference being that they were 20 times larger. In 1825, Mantell named his animal Iguanodon, and from using isometric scaling, estimated the creature at around 18 metres in length, basing his estimates off of modern-day lizards, an estimate that would later be discarded after Richard Owen's creation of the clade Dinosauria. More complete specimens of Iguanodon eventually rolled around for Mantell to research, one specimen being the Maidstone slab in 1834. The slab, containing the remains of what Mantell identified as an iguanodon due to its distinctive teeth, nowadays attributed to a close relative Mantellodon, offered more complete remains of the animal, allowing Mantell to produce an artistic rendering of Iguanodon based off of the Maidstone specimen. Despite being the most complete specimen of the animal at the time, it was still incomplete, enough for Mantell to make some mistakes, the most famous of which being the placement of the animal's thumb spike of what he thought was a horn on the animal's nose. In 1849, a few years before Mantell's death in 1852, he realised that iguanodonts were not heavy elephantine animals like he initially thought, finding that they in fact had slender forelimbs, but due to his passing, he was unable to participate in the creation of the Crystal Palace Park sculptures, and Richard Owen's interpretation of the animals became that seen by the public. 2 imposing models of said sculptures were created, with a banquet for 20 famously being held in one of the models on New Year's Eve 1853. Like Megalosaurus before it, many species of related dinosaurs were classified under the Iguanodon genus, with fossils all throughout the world implying a worldwide existence, leading to some to believe that Iguanodon was one of the most successful of all dinosaurs, although this has changed due to more strict classification, and for the moment, only 2 species belong under the genus, that being I. sartensis and I. galvensis. Since its description in 1825, Iguanodon has had a small but notable place in paleontology pop culture. The 2 life-size models of Iguanodon built at the Crystal Palace Park greatly contributed to the popularity of the genus, and are nowadays considered by many to be the most iconic Victorian dinosaur restorations in the world, and the standout of the animals at Crystal Palace. It's my opinion that the Iguanodon models are in fact the most spectacular of the entire menagerie of extinct organisms featured at the park. They differ from the other models, which are posed in a more subdued and conservative way, while Hawkins' Iguanodon have energy to their appearance, with one individual lounging around in its habitat, while another stands on higher ground, looking vigilant and alert, giving an aesthetically pleasing but also believable reconstruction of the animals in their daily life. Iguanodon has also been featured in visual media, from protagonist of the Disney movie Dinosaur to its world-spanning dominance in Walking with Dinosaurs, coexisting with the strangely out-of-place Utahraptor. More on that in my Walking with Dinosaurs review. Iguanodon is also featured on the Maidstone coat of arms in recognition of the discovery of the more complete skeleton of Mantellodon that helped to influence the reconstruction of Iguanodon, the reptile standing alongside the regal lion as a supporter. Because of its early description at the beginnings of the field of paleontology as we know it today, Iguanodon, like Megalosaurus, has gone through drastic reconstruction as more material of the animals becomes available, becoming a barometer of changing public and scientific perceptions of not only Iguanodon, but dinosaurs as a whole, with our understanding constantly changing in order to find what is the most accurate, and is in my opinion one of the reasons why dinosaurs are so popular in the first place. What your father or grandfather thought of dinosaurs in their youth is an example of said public perception, with each generation growing up with different interpretations of these animals, with following generations having their own interpretations, and so on, leading to the permanence of dinosaurs in our society. With an iconic thumbs up and drastic reconstructions, it is no wonder as to why Iguanodon still has a place in the history of paleontology. In 1832, Gideon Mantell purchased the remains of a large saurian that had been freed after a gunpowder explosion had demolished a quarry rock face in Tilgate Forest. Several of the boulders showed the remains of some kind of reptile, with Mantell managing to organise the pieces into a single skeleton. After Mantell united the pieces together, he was delighted with the find as previous elements of fellow dinosaurs Megalosaurus and Iguanodon had only consisted of single bone elements, with the discovery representing the most complete non-avian dinosaur known at the time. Mantell was willing to classify the find as belonging to that of Iguanodon, but he was persuaded otherwise by William Clift, the curator of the Royal College of Surgeons of England Museum, and his assistant John Gray, who noted that the several plates and spikes that adorned the specimen were part of body armour that in life would have been attached to either the back or sides of the rump. In November 1832, Mantell described the animal, creating a new name in the process, Hylaeosaurus, the Wildine lizard, in reference to the Wildine group, the geological formation in which the dinosaur was first found. After changes in nomenclature, Henry de Lebesche warned Mantell that the changed conventions meant that only he who provided a full species name was regarded as the author, meaning that unless Mantell gave Hylaeosaurus a specific name himself, then another could claim the chance to be credited, even if they weren't the initial describer of the genus. After this, Mantell chose the species name Armatus, meaning armed or armoured after the animal's spikes and armoured plate. As Mantell himself put it, there appears every reason to conclude that either its back was armed with a formidable row of spines, constituting a dermal fringe, or that its tail possessed the same appendage. Many details about the build of Hylaeosaurus are still unknown today due to limited remains, although it is most often reconstructed as being most similar in build to the nudosaurid Polacanthus as a fairly typical member of the group. Hylaeosaurus, despite being part of the trio of dinosaur genre used by Richard Owen to name Dinosauria, is often neglected when compared to Megalosaurus and Iguanodon. Hylaeosaurus was reconstructed by Benjamin Hawkins for the Crystal Palace Park, but its impact on the visitors compared to its two contemporaries is not nearly as high. This is likely due to its place in the park, which although prominently placed between the Megalosaurus and Iguanodon models, the Hylaeosaurus' sculpture's face is not visible from the public paths alongside the secondary island, meaning that instead only the hindquarters and the left side of the model are visible to visitors. This is great for showing off its spiked back, but it undeniably leaves less of an impression on visitors, especially as it is overshadowed by three far more imposing and appealing statues, which is quite a shame considering the model itself is quite good, and has its own unique merits. Hylaeosaurus, unlike the other two dinosaurs, has also never functioned as a wastebasket taxon, and has not gone through near as much scientific revision and changes in how it is generally perceived. On an unrelated note, before I move on to the next part of the video, I want to say that despite the Crystal Palace Park models being inaccurate to today's standards, they do show us how things in science, and especially paleontology, can change. Even if something is seen as modern and up-to-date at one time, there is always the chance that future discoveries will change what we know, whether that be small or large. The criticism that the Crystal Palace Park models are significantly outdated and are examples of poor reconstruction and craftsmanship fail to see how cutting edge the models were when they were constructed in the 1850s, and although far removed from what we now know today about dinosaurs, the change in how we view the animals is a great thing to see, and it's a good view of scientific refinement and progress, and that is an important thing. The models capture the foundation perfectly of what makes dinosaurs different from other animals. The fact that they are gigantic and otherworldly comes through excellently with the models, culminating in fascinating and well-constructed pieces of art that show how our view of science can change over time. At least the Crystal Palace Park models don't look like these abominations of nature. There are clearly far more things out there far more deserving of this inaccuracy criticism. Rant aside, the first three dinosaurs are nowadays mostly overshadowed by larger and more bizarre animals, but their importance to the field is nonetheless important, and they deserve to be noted as such. While they may not be the most well-known nowadays, their impact is still felt and immortalised for the whole world to view their splendour. In 1838, a man by the name of John Hopkins was digging in a clay pit in Haddonfield, New Jersey, when he uncovered some large bones in the ground, putting them on display at his house, interestingly enough. The bones would remain on display in the house until they sparked the interest of William Falk, philanthropist, lawyer, historian and geologist, who revisited the site where Hopkins had found the bones in 1858, contacting paleontologist Joseph Leidy to assist in the recovery process, with the two recovering an almost complete set of limbs, along with a pelvis, parts of the foot and vertebrae, alongside two small parts of the jaw. Falk and Leidy studied the fossils together, with Leidy formally describing and naming the remains Hadrosaurus falci in recognition of his collaborator. Leidy noted that the bones were from a dinosaur by their similarity to that of Iguanodon, although the skeleton of Hadrosaurus proved to be far more complete, which quickly tarnished the Crystal Palace models as accurate educative material. Leidy interestingly reconstructed Hadrosaurus as a biped, quite a contrast from the quadrupedal view that was widely accepted of dinosaurs at the time. A skeleton was assembled in 1868 by a team that included Benjamin Hawkins, which was put on display at the Philadelphia Academy of Natural Sciences, becoming the world's first ever mounted dinosaur skeleton, the skeleton being completed with additional sculpted parts, most notably a reconstructed skull which was not found alongside the discovered bones, alongside miscellaneous ribs and vertebrae. Nevertheless, the mounted skeleton attracted much publicity, wondering the public in the process, with replicas making their way to other public venues, further spreading its image. The skeleton became so popular that the Academy started to charge admission for entry to keep the attendance under control, no doubt earning quite a bit of money in the process. As mentioned prior, the skull of the Hadrosaurus specimen was never recovered, and today no such specimen exists with a preserved skull, meaning that despite the fact that the family Hadrosauridae is named after it, thus being a type genus in the process, the skeleton was for a long while deemed as incomplete, and thus was not useful in comparing to other hadrosaurs for classification purposes, leading most scientists to consider the name a nomen dubium, or dubious name. Since then, a re-evaluation of the fossil material in 2011 noted several distinct characteristics of the skeleton that had previously gone unnoticed, including differences in the hip which allowed the genus of Hadrosaurus to remain a valid taxa. Nowadays, Hadrosaurus is seen as a part of its own lineage, remaining alone on the phylogenetic tree, away from the distinctive Lambeosaurinae and Saurolophinae. In spite of its taxonomic shifts, Hadrosaurus has most definitely left an impact on paleontology, starting a tremendous expansion in paleontological activity in North America, which alongside the westward expansion of settlements of the country, led to a massive increase in our understanding of the natural history of North America, including the discovery of the Western Interior Seaway that once split America in two, and the chaotic bone wars that introduced a great number of iconic animals to our view, including Allosaurus, Triceratops and Stegosaurus, to name a few. For now at least, Hadrosaurus sits alone within its own family of Hadrosaurinae due to its incomplete nature, but its history has not gone unnoticed. Birds are dinosaurs, which is obvious to say. They share numerous characteristics with their non-avian counterparts, including hollow bones, feathers, and even vestigial claws. The evidence is massive, yet until rather recently, this notion was refuted amongst a great deal of scientists. For one, before the discovery of Archaeopteryx and its kin, dinosaurs were the complete polar opposite of birds, and there was no reason to believe that there was any connection between the two. Dinosaurs were interpreted as sluggish, scaly beasts that were destined to extinction, whilst birds were agile, feathered, and small. This interpretation shifted with the discovery of Deinonychus and the ensuing dinosaur renaissance, but before then in the 1800s, no such evidence existed to support a close relation. That was until the discovery of Archaeopteryx. The first skeleton of the animal, labelled the London specimen, was unearthed near Germany and was sold to the Natural History Museum in London, where it now remains. Even though the fossil lacked a head and neck, it showcased particularly well preserved wings and a bird-like frame. But this was not just any old bird.
This animal, for one, had a long bony tail, something the time only attributed to reptiles, as well as a more Archosaurian than avian pelvic girdle and femur joints. Coincidentally, the discovery of the specimen came just 2 years after Darwin had published his revolutionary book On the Origin of Species, and was a perfect example of evolution at work. Archaeopteryx in this case showing the transition from reptile to bird. Darwin himself described in the 4th edition of the book how little we know of Earth's past, and that many more transitional forms likely awaited discovery. Until quite recently, these authors might have maintained, and some have maintained, that the whole class of birds came suddenly into existence during the Eocene period, but now we know on the authority of Professor Owen that a bird certainly lived during the deposition of the early greensand, and still more recently, that strange bird, the Archaeopteryx, with a long lizard-like tail bearing a pair of feathers on each joint, and with its wings furnished with 2 free claws, has been discovered in the Oolitic slates of Solnhofen. Hardly any recent discovery shows more forcibly than this how little we as of yet know of the former inhabitants of this world. The discovery of Archaeopteryx led to an early success for Darwin's theory. An animal showing such a clear transitional form led to the focus of paleontology to shift into understanding evolutionary paths and how these extinct organisms relate to one another. The second discovered specimen, known as the Berlin specimen, further enhanced the apparent connection between dinosaurs and birds. This specimen remains the most complete yet found of the genus, and is arguably one of the best preserved and stunning fossils to have ever been discovered. The specimen was preserved with a complete skull, showcasing the small peg-like teeth within its jaws, possessing the teeth of a dinosaur, but with the overall head shape of a bird, all culminating in a strange, never-before-seen creature. The Berlin specimen truly is spectacular, the articulated skeleton captured in the rock in a dynamic pose, capturing the very pose the animal was fossilised in, with sprawling wings and a long tail. It is no wonder as to why Archaeopteryx is so well known and regarded. Thomas Huxley, a notable supporter and advocate of Darwin's theory of evolution, noted the comparisons between the small Compsognathus and Archaeopteryx, coming to the conclusion that birds evolved from small carnivorous dinosaurs, evolving from animals similar in build to Compsognathus, a conclusion which was quite ahead of his time. Huxley's comparisons between the two then distinct groups unfortunately fell to the wayside and would remain that way until the 1960s. A turning point for the classification of birds and dinosaurs came in the early 20th century with the writings of Gerhard Heilmann. Like Huxley, Heilmann compared Archaeopteryx and other birds to a large list of prehistoric reptiles looking for similarities, with him also coming to the conclusion that theropod dinosaurs like Compsognathus were the most similar in body plan to Archaeopteryx. However, Heilmann noted that birds possessed clavicles fused to form a bone called the furcula or wishbone, and while clavicles were known in more primitive reptiles, fossil evidence of wishbones had not yet been discovered or recognised in theropod dinosaurs. Heilmann was also a firm believer in Dollo's law, which states that evolution is not reversible, meaning that in Dollo's own words, an organism never returns exactly to a former state, even if it finds itself placed in conditions of existence identical to those in which it has previously lived. It always keeps some trace of the intermediate stages through which has passed. Heilmann could not accept that clavicles were lost in dinosaurs and re-evolved in birds, so Heilmann ruled out dinosaurs as the ancestors of birds, ascribing all similarities to be nothing more than convergent evolution. Heilmann's very thorough approach to his research ensured that his book publishing his findings became a classic in the field, with its conclusions of bird origins which was accepted by nearly all evolutionary biologists for the next 4 decades. Because of Heilmann's research, until the 1960s rolled around, the dinosaur and bird connection became obsolete, and any possibility of dinosaurs being interpreted as warm-blooded, active animals fell to the wayside. This removed dinosaurs from a central role in debates about the origin of living species, particularly birds, which may have contributed to the subsequent decline of academic interest in dinosaurs. Any energetic momentum the dinosaurs had in paleontology was abandoned in favour of more sluggish, slow animals that were doomed to certain extinction.
Artwork by Zdeněk Burian and Rudolf Zallinger further reinforced the conception, with the Great Depression and 2 World Wars further sinking the studies of dinosaurs into a decades-long lull. Aside from the decline in paleontology, interest in Archaeopteryx has continued since its discovery, ranging from debates about its flight capabilities to taxonomic shifts, as well as the unearthing of several other beautifully preserved stem birds, such as Archaeornis and Chaltingia. Through all of this, Archaeopteryx has continued to remain an integral and iconic part of our understanding of bird evolution, and even though the puzzle has gotten increasingly more difficult to pin down in recent years, Archaeopteryx has remained an iconic staple of paleontology, and is a great example of evolution in action. Sauropods were truly magnificent animals. Their size amongst the largest genre would have been an awe-inspiring sight back in the Mesozoic, and they are among the most iconic of all dinosaurs. It is no wonder then that the first recognised sauropods would have been an important part of paleontological history, and that is certainly true. Diplocodus, the sauropod I will be talking about in this segment, wasn't the first discovered, but considering that Richard Owen published the first description of Ichthyosaurus and Cardiodon in 1841, identifying them as marine reptiles removed from dinosaurs in classification, I won't be mentioning them, at least not in this video. Anyways, the first fossil was found at Cannon City, Colorado by Benjamin Mudge and Samuel Williston in 1877, which was named Diplodocus longus, long double beam, by paleontologist Othniel Marsh in 1878. Several species were assigned to the genus, including D. lacustris and D. hayi, with the most notable and famous being D. carnegie, and for good reason. This particular species of Diplodocus made a name for itself, not only for its near-complete skeleton, but due to philanthropist Andrew Carnegie. As the story goes, King of England Edward VII saw a sketch of the skeleton of Diplodocus in Carnegie's Skibo Castle in Scotland. Edward was enthusiastic about procuring a specimen for the British Museum, the Natural History Museum in London, with Carnegie subsequently inquiring with paleontologists if it were possible to produce a duplicate of the newly discovered skeleton. Creating a plaster duplicate of the huge animal was no easy task, but by the spring of 1905, the London Museum had its dinosaur, and it was an immediate success upon its unveiling, proving to be so popular that the museum's director at the time, E. Ray Lancaster, was frustrated and probably a little jealous that an American dinosaur was getting so much attention when there were already a number of British dinosaurs known to the public. The response to the skeleton was overwhelmingly positive and attracted a great deal of media attention. For many, this was the first example of a dinosaur that anyone had seen, and to see such an animal with a huge body and small head must have been a tremendous experience back in 1905. Nicknamed Dippy, the skeleton has become one of the most famous skeletons of any dinosaur ever, and this was enhanced by museums across the world wanting their own Diplodocus. One of Carnegie's aims was to foster world peace, and so the kind gift of a dinosaur could help to ease international relations. Carnegie's distribution of skeletons to Germany, Italy, Russia, France, and Argentina, to name a few, helped to make the word dinosaur a household word, and resulted in the subsequent popularity of the entire genus of Diplodocus, as the skeleton had been on display in so many countries. Coupled with the status of at the time the longest known land animal, Diplodocus as a genus enjoyed a great deal of recognition. This recognition has made Diplodocus one of the most famous sauropods, and it has appeared in numerous sources of media, whether they be documentaries or paleoart. A petition to the ICZN in 2016 was even made to make Diplodocus carnegie the new type species of the genus, although the proposal was rejected in 2018, maintaining D. longus as the type species despite its dubious nature. This goes to show how Diplodocus still has a large appeal to people, and that its iconicity is still going strong. And with that, I hope you enjoyed the video. The 1800s were a time of discovery and innovation, especially for the field of paleontology. A lot of the basic fundamentals were hypothesised and put into use in this century, with many of the essentials of the science that were coined in the 1800s still being used in the present day, whether that be for classification or field research. As well as this, many now iconic animals were brought to our attention, and our methods of mapping out our past gave us greater insights than ever before into what came before us. This is part 1 of a 3-part series, where in the next 2 instalments I will be covering some of the notable paleontological discoveries of both the 1900s and 2000s, so you'll have plenty to look forward to. I have many videos in the works, both paleontological and zoological, as well as some other unique topics, and I hope to continue making these kinds of videos in the future, alongside a New Zealand Bird of the Week if I can manage. So I'll see you next time, whenever that may be. See you later.